Welcome to the show, Rashmi and Nadia.
Thank you so
Thanks for
much.
having us.
Welcome, welcome. As we were talking about earlier, Melanie, Maddie, our podcaster, producer, and I, when we were first coming up with this takeover, we were thinking about taboo topics and who could we invite. And I think Rashmi and Nadia were the number one and number two people on our list to make sure that we were going to be interviewing. So we're so excited to have both of you guys here.
Excited for this conversation. Yes, I feel like Nadia has a lot of great insights too. So I'm sure I'm going to be learning from her as well.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome.
So Nadia, we're going to start with you first. I know you've actually been on the Startup Women podcast before. I've interviewed you a couple years ago in the infancy of Marlow. So it's amazing to see the growth and the traction and the community that you've built over the last couple of years with your co-founders. And so I know your story very intimately, but your founding story really illuminates so many issues when it comes to women and menstrual health and, this sort of inception story when your friend was given some advice by their doctor when they were experiencing pain while inserting a tampon. And this is just such a perfect illustration for the need for Marlow. So would love to hear that story again from your lens.
For sure. Yeah, we actually started Marlow in our last year of university. So I was at the Ivy Business School at Western, and we were taking an entrepreneurship course. And I remember in the course, we were all so nervous because we thought, how are we supposed to come up with a business within the matter of a semester? And we thought we had to have some crazy invention or already have some patented idea. And our professors told us just to take a step back and really think about a problem that you're passionate about solving. And that was kind of my introduction to entrepreneurship and the idea that you don't have to have the product perfect right away, but as long as you have a problem that you're passionate about, that's how you can kind of get started with your founder journey. And so we started to think about different problems that we were passionate about, and sustainability and women's health definitely came up as something we were interested in. We also started to talk about how there's so much innovation and research, and we had read a stat that there's actually more research into male pattern baldness than all of women's health. So, in a world of so much innovation, why was it that the women's health space was so ignored? And we started to think about the period care space specifically and how it's always been so uncomfortable to insert tampons. Growing up, our team were swimmers and dancers, and we always needed tampons to compete in our sport. And we would watch as people would skip practices or sit out of gym class or almost pause on their life when they were on their period and just be uncomfortable and just skip out on these amazing aspects of their life just because they couldn't use a tampon. And so we decided to try to come up with a better solution. That was the problem we had narrowed in on. And my friend, as part of the project, went to the doctor to see if maybe there's already some kind of solution out there to make tampons easier. And the doctor actually said to spit on the tampon to make it easier. And we were just so shocked by that idea. We were like, that cannot be the only way to make tampons easier. And it's what led us to create Marlow, which is the very first lubricated tampon. It makes it smoother and easier and more comfortable. And we really prioritize toxin-free, clean, all sustainable ingredients.
Amazing. And Nadia, you've built such a community around Marlow. So can you give our listeners just a bit of an understanding? It's beyond just this product. How have you connected all of these, menstruators across Canada and even internationally now, I think?
Yeah, we really wanted to prioritize not only the product, but actually, like you said, building a community around this. And so we've actually given it a name. It's called the TMI Club, where we break down anything that's typically considered TMI around periods. I know growing up, you don't get taught enough in health classes, and depending on your parents and how comfortable they are speaking about these topics, they're often just swept under the rug, and you're kind of forced to go down Reddit threads and Google all these questions and all these things about, are these normal symptoms or things to be experiencing? And so we decided through social media and also now even through school programs to create a whole curriculum around menstrual health and to break down these topics in a more easily digestible way. And we want Marlow to kind of be like a big sister that you can turn to when you have any questions about your body or periods or reproductive health. And so through social media and these different school programs and events, we really try and build community and make it a more comfortable and safe topic to speak about.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. And so Rashmi, I know, you're living and breathing in a very similar space and you're seeing lack of care and empathy and, knowledge around what resources you have around menstrual health, what products could you potentially be using and, the overall impact on the environment when you are using a lot of these elements. Have you, had a similar journey to Nadia and understanding, a core pain point when it's come to menstruation? I know your product and the unique IP can be applied to so much more, but maybe you can give us a bit of a guide into the beginning of Aruna Revolution and how you're disrupting the femtech space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I kind of had a similar journey to Nadia in that it started as we were discovering more about our own menstrual health, So for me, I realized that I didn't really know much about my own menstrual health until like my mid-20s, where I was like getting pretty like severe like luteal phase like symptoms. And I was like, what is going on? Like, it's so difficult to manage your menstrual health. And then on top of that, having to stress out about the products that you're using and, them not being great for you was a really strange thing to be going through in my mid-20s. And so it was around the time where I think we had seen some lawsuits come out for menstrual products containing like PFAS and dioxins, and realizing that there was a lot of challenges with those. But at the same time, I was doing my master's degree in biomedical engineering too. And during my master's degree, I had taken a couple of midwifery courses, some gynecology courses as well. And one thing that I realized is how scary the technology that's been like developed for women is, in the sense that, so for example, if you look at an electronic fetal monitor, there is very little like scientific like backing behind how it works. And the fact that it's used as like the golden standard, and the fact that it's causing so many C-sections to be happening, and there's a lot of challenges associated with that too. And so I think realizing that there's been a massive lack of research around this, a lack of innovation around this too. And then also just, I guess during the pandemic, I was working as a clinical engineer as well, and just seeing the amount of waste being generated by the healthcare system, and having this realization that while we're healing someone today, we're harming a million people in the future with the waste that we're creating, kind of all accumulated into me starting Aruna and wanting to create a product that was better for our body and better for the planet. But in doing so, I think the other thing that kind of came about it was every time we talked about these menstrual products, people would come up to us and tell us their story. Nadia, I'm sure you've had this experience too. Like anytime you talk about your product, people will tell you like stories about their menstrual health and like all of the different things that have happened. And I'm like, this is so interesting. And so I think the one thing that also came up very early on is the need for education around menstrual health, and just the fact that people haven't had to any significant extent that they understand their own menstrual health, that they understand the different phases of their cycle and how to manage it. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we are focused on as well, is like we're providing information for people, and we've created this product that is better for the body and the planet too.
Amazing. And just for scale, Rashmi, I know, we met at the Startup Canada tour. You won one of our pitch competitions, which is amazing. And I remember your pitch so vividly, and some of the really compelling stats that you had around the life cycle of a menstrual pad. I think it was, correct me if I'm not wrong, 300 years that it takes to break down a menstrual pad. Is that right?
So it's between 500 to 800 years.
Oh, it's even worse. 5 to 800 years.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And you've revolutionized that. How? What's the turnaround? A month?
Yeah, exactly. So if you take our products and you put them into a compost, they'll break down within about 90 days.
Unbelievable.
Depending on the composting system. Yeah.
Incredible, Rashmi.
Absolutely incredible.
And something that, you're potentially using multiple pads through multiple days of a cycle throughout however many menstruating years that we have. Like the amount of waste in this space is massive, but what options do folks have? Like I appreciate that, when you go to the store, you have, maybe 2 or 3 different brands that you're potentially choosing from, and the opportunities that you're both presenting in sort of CPG spaces. Unbelievable. We are huge fans. But that's super helpful just in getting kind of the beginning stories from both of you. And Melanie, passing it over to you for some more in-depth questions.
Well, I just wanted to build on that like that. I know that Rashmi, Aruna Revolution has been recognized very recently by the government of Nova Scotia for that innovative work at the intersection of human and environmental health, which is so incredible. And like you're both speaking to this severe lack of innovation, like spitting on a tampon. Come on. And this has been a thread throughout all the conversations we've had in this series, starting with Rachel Bartholomew with Hyabe Health, like the lack of innovation in women's health, in like for menstruating bodies, it's horrifying. And the amount of education you're having to do is beautiful, that you're creating these communities. You have the TMI club, and Rashmi, I know you also have Flow and Tell, which I'd love to get into in a little bit. And so you're doing so much incredible work with building community and education, and being recognized for that, which is great. On the flip side of that, of course, the fact that we need to do all this education and community building means there's a severe lack thereof. And I'm curious about like what kind of reactions you've had, like when you've been you've both been in front of the dragons, you've both talked to a lot of investors, you've raised money. When you're working into these kind of like, or moving into these spaces where there's perhaps not that kind of like that education where they haven't received the education themselves or the community, or had that, experience. What has that been like? Like, what has it been like to get in front of more traditional kind of investment spaces?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's definitely a mixed reaction usually. And I think maybe you've heard this too. One of the most common things is, isn't this just a niche market? Like, is this, this is not many people experience this problem. And I'm always just so shocked because I'm like, this is 50% of the population that's experiencing this. How is this a niche market? And I think for us, we always get so many different questions about tampons. Like, people will be like, oh, there's different sizes. Like, there's light, regular, super, there's super plus. Oh, there's wings, or like, there's just all these different questions about the products that are so basic to us and they've never had to experience it before. And for us, I know a lot of times they ask, like, is tampon insertion even a problem? Like, I'm sure it's fine. People have been doing it for so long, and they just kind of discount the problem and assume that because no one's ever thought to solve it, it's not a big enough problem to solve. And I think that kind of comes back to the education piece, that this is so stigmatized. And for so long, if you had trouble or pain, you thought that something was wrong with you. And I know a lot of our customers will come to us saying that, saying, I thought I was broken. I thought something was wrong with me. I didn't realize so many other people experience these pains. And so I think the education piece is so critical so that people can see it's not just you, it's the products, and it's not a niche problem. So many other people are experiencing this. We've come across a study from Mintel that 81% of women struggle to use tampons. So it's definitely not a niche problem. There's so many other people who are experiencing it too. And I'm sure you probably have similar questions and reactions too.
Yeah, well, I know Rashmi, there I often see questions coming at you like, well, could this be used for other purposes? Which I know that is like a big thing for you, but I have seen that. I saw that on the Dragons episode in
Yeah.
particular.
I mean,
So like,
also
yeah, speak.
diapers for sure. I do love the
I
diapers.
obviously, yeah, like I would love the diapers. Yeah, that's been my life for the past, 22 months. I would love to have that in diapers, but like I would love to know, yeah, like what your perspective and like from the materials production, because you're on like the material production side, and like you're a biomedical engineer, and it's like an interesting intersection in having to like have that, that you've chosen menstruating products first, and that you sometimes, from what I've seen, get a little bit of pushback on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the same thing that Nadia said, is that they haven't experienced it. So, okay, so I like to take a step back to try and understand why this is happening. And one thing that I've always realized and recognized is this happens when there's a lack of representation in the people that are asking the questions, right? And so if you don't have women, if you don't have women of color or like menstruators on the side that's asking the questions, and that's usually where the questions come from, is like, is this a big enough problem? Like, who's this actually helping? Like I've had like the niche statement as well, like, this is so niche, and I'm like, is it really though? Is it? And so I think it's quite interesting, because sometimes it's not necessarily even that they say no outright. Sometimes they just don't dig in with the same level of interest or urgency as they would with, like, crypto or AI technology. So I think that there's a lack of representation on the side of like people that are investing and people that are the decision makers, essentially. And that's where a lot of this comes in, and that's why it has also trickled into the lack of innovation, because again, even in the world of engineering, there hasn't been a lot of representation until now. We haven't seen women engineers and, women of color engineers too, as part of like the people that are creating these devices. And so I think from my perspective, I've come in because this is a problem for me. And so I'm solving a problem for me, but at the same time, I'm solving a problem for other people too. And I think that's what's going to start happening more and more, as we have more women in the field of engineering, more women in the field of business. We're going to start seeing more and more solutions to our own problems as well. But I think that also needs to be supported by investors that are potentially women as well, because I think some of our biggest champions have been like women that understand this. They have daughters or they go through menstruation themselves, and so they're like, this makes so much sense, like, we need to invest in you. And that's where a lot of our support comes from initially. Those are our champions that connect us to other people as well. So yeah, I
And I think
And you've
that
both been
it's
really, oh, sorry, go ahead, Nadia.
I was gonna say, I think that point on representation is so important. And like, it's not even just on the investor side, but also on the founder side. I feel like
Mhm.
because there's so few female founder success stories that get to like that big exit, like we can probably name some of the Canadian ones like Joanna Griffiths and Tara Bosch and like all these same few people come to mind, which is amazing, and they're really paving the way, but there hasn't been a lot of success stories for these investors to look on. And I feel like that's one of the things that need to change, because they just, even this past week, Poppy was a great example, and like everyone's so excited, and this woman founder, big exit. And now I feel like if someone looks at a beverage company, maybe they'd be more incentivized to want to invest in it, because they're like, oh, now I've seen this success, I've seen how it plays out, I see that these big companies are willing to, acquire, and they can get this exit. But until we have more representation on the investor side and on the founder side of people getting these big exits, then of course they're going to discount and say, isn't this a niche market? It's not a viable business opportunity. So we need representation on both sides, I think, to make it actually all work.
Those are great points. And when you're sitting, across, obviously you have your women allies, you have folks that understand the problem and are going to empathize with the solution and sort of see themselves in it. When you are talking to potential male investors or folks on the other side that don't deal with this problem, what has actually landed you the deal, or landed that conversion of them saying, oh, now I really understand, both the business case and the opportunity for me coming in as an investor? Do you have any advice or any experiences that kind of pop out with seeing that unlock happen on the other side of the table?
Yeah. I would say, I would say making sure that you can find analogies that they relate to. So for me, something I always say is like, that pain inserting a tampon is very similar to that friction or discomfort you would experience if you were shaving without shaving cream, or if you were putting a contact in that was very dry without contact solution. And I try to find these examples that like they can relate to. And it's like, that's how half the world is feeling every single month for 39 years of their life. So imagine that discomfort and that, feeling they're going through. So I would say finding analogies, and then also really focusing on the business opportunity and the business case, because I think a lot of times as women founders, we focus on like the impact and sustainability, and we focus on all these amazing things, but like we're not building a nonprofit. Like we actually have a business opportunity behind this as well, and we can get to that exit and we can build a profitable, scalable venture. So I always really focus on like, here's the financial projections, here's all the key milestones that you can help us unlock if you give us the funding. And I think really painting that clear kind of trajectory of these are the next few steps I need to get to before our business can scale, that really helps them to see the full picture versus just seeing it as, okay, I'm giving some money towards this impact cause. You have to focus on like the broader investment opportunity, because at the end of the day, they are looking for a return. And if they can see that trajectory, then that helps them to buy more into the business as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Nadia. I think when it comes to investors that don't necessarily experience the problem that we're solving, it's important to communicate it in a way that they do understand it, or make it into a problem for them to understand. And so obviously something that we've done is we've talked about our application to diapers, and that's something that tends to be a bit more comfortable for them to think about, whatever. But also I've kind of reframed the problem sometimes to it being more an environmental problem too, that affects them. So one of the perspectives that I think has really been kind of causing people to take a step back and be like, wait, this is a problem, is the idea of like microplastics entering the body. Everyone knows that it's a health challenge, but no one thinks about where it comes from. Like the microplastics are coming from used pads and diapers. Like people realize that, right? Like you're eating plastics from used diapers and pads. And I think once that perspective clicks in the mind, they're like, wait, I don't want to eat used diapers and pads. Right? And so I think making it a problem that they relate to and a problem that they're able to internalize certainly helps. Again, as Nadia mentioned, we're a business, it's a for-profit company that's going to generate money for them and for us as well. And so highlighting how this is a for-profit business, how it's going to result in that $100 million exit or $1 billion unicorn exit is certainly important, and highlighting it in a way that they're able to understand. So it's not necessarily about the problem that we're solving and how people are going to purchase this pad because it's better for them, but also understanding that there's policies involved, there's other things in play, and bringing all of those in as well, I think is really important in communicating with people that might not necessarily be the immediate like target audience of the product or the consumers of the products, but are still needed to invest into the product.
Super interesting. Something we were talking about just a few weeks ago was that kind of like bringing together what you've both been saying. Like there's fewer femtech companies in the world than there are fintech companies in the US, and it's also a hugely growing sector, right? And that also means we've not seen the unicorns yet. We need time. We need time to give to the femtech companies to be able to grow to that. And I think that's like, it's such an interesting idea, but like how do we nourish the champions that are helping to maybe speed up that time? Like it does just take time, but patience isn't everyone's virtue in this space. So like how do we create more champions, and how do we like what can we do for you, like not like Rashmi and Nadia, if you walked into your next accelerator or your next space where there was ecosystem actors sitting around a table and saying, how can we help you? But also, how do we help the next Nadia, the next Rashmi? Like, what can we do as your potential champions? Like, what kind of characteristics would you be looking for in us, and what can we nourish in our peers? What would be your hope?
Yeah. I think for me, one thing that I've realized is as you get into this world, there are so many unknowns. And bridging the gap for the unknowns and doing it as fast as possible is a way to like grow quickly, because the more time you spend in that black area like trying to figure things out, the more time other people have to catch up to what you're working on, right? And so bridging that gap is certainly a way to help startups in our stage get to the next level and get to that unicorn status. But I think bringing like on the topic of there not being enough femtech companies, I think there's actually a big translation gap between academic and the world of entrepreneurship. There's so much like research, so much knowledge, so much happening in the world of academic when it comes to women's health, when it comes to ideas around femtech, even on the side of healthcare, like in hospitals, if you go and talk to doctors, they're like, this is awful, this is awful, this is awful, we need someone to build this. But there's this big gap between identifying the problems and even the research that's being done to come up with solutions and translating that to the real world. And I think there needs to be a lot of support done there in a way that is truly helpful, because right now there's a lot of people trying to bridge that gap, but in a way that isn't helpful, because they're trying to take parts of the IP away from the people trying to create these products. They're trying to leverage funding from the government and do a lot of other things, but it's not actually helping people. And so I think there needs to be a critical analysis of the way that we're bridging the translation from healthcare settings, from academic settings, and turning them into entrepreneurs. And it needs to be done in a way that isn't, I'm trying to think of the word, like, isn't malicious or isn't going to prevent the company from, or the person creating the company from like going into that next stage.
Yeah.
And mutual beneficial.
I really like that. And I feel like even building on top of that more, I think there's so much support for early stage companies. Like, this is how you build a pitch deck. This is how we can refine your pitch. Here's how to raise. Here's like the financial projections. And there's like amazing, amazing support organizations around that stage. But once you get past that stage, I found that it's hard to find good organizations that are supporting that scaling step of the journey. And there's so much to learn around like sales training, sales process, customer acquisition, marketing strategies, and channel mix. And that's such a big learning curve as well. And so I think if there's more support on once you have the business up and running, once you've kind of secured your first couple of rounds, now what? Now what does it look like to build a team, to launch in these retailers, to bring government contracts and B2B? And I feel like that's a really big piece of the puzzle that's missing. And I found there are some good programs in the US that kind of have helped us along the way in terms of scaling and marketing strategy. There hasn't been much in Canada to tap into. So I think that would be nice as, if you're launching on Amazon, here's the step-by-step guide to doing it. And how do you actually take that concept or that academic research and actually scale it into a more profitable business and venture?
It's so interesting to think of, okay, we have all of these like baby femtechs that need nurturing and need growing and, all this, energy that's sort of coming. But if the ecosystem is not running in parallel and growing with so many of these femtechs, we're never going to be able to see those scaled businesses that then create the foundation for the other folks. Like, it truly needs to be pipeline on both sides. The entrepreneurs, the support organizations, the blend of academics and research sort of filling those gaps in between.
Yeah.
So that's actually a really good call out, I think, to the ecosystem to make sure that those wraparound supports are following at pace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. Thank you both for providing that visual. Like, it's just, I'm seeing like a map in my brain of like knowledge translation and mobilization to expediting that gap in a meaningful way. And like, yes, there's lots of early support or early startup supports in some ways, but then there's also a real gap for like the first 24 months. And we were just talking about this in another space that Kayla and I were in around like the gap for companies who are under 24 months old or looking for less than 100K or looking just for that, like that first, the firsts.
True seed.
And then once they get past that, as Nadia, you're mentioning that scaling piece. So there's like this, it's really interesting how much opportunity there is. And I think that's something we've also been focusing on in this series is like that there are very real challenges in so many different ways. And the amount of pressure on you to do all this education, even though you obviously are incredible at it and love it, and it's incredible for your communities, it's still a lot. And then there's all these other pieces that we're talking about. But there's also incredible hope and opportunity, I think, as we see this sector growing. And thank you both for the work you're doing in this space. I think it brings us all hope for sure. Now, I mentioned flow and tell earlier, and I would love to jump back into that along this theme of education and community piece. And I think it's amazing what you're doing, Rashmi. I'd love to hear more about. I know you invite menstruators from different cultures and experiences to talk about periods of menstruation. And I'd love to hear more about what that's been like, how it's like impacted your growing of your business, like what that's looked like, that community education piece, and how that ties into the we are a business and like we're really great at this and there's opportunity, like how those two intersect and maybe some surprising things you've learned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Flow and Tell is a podcast series that we started end of last year. And the goal of this was to help people have like candid conversations about it, because we realized that there is a bit of a like people want to talk about it, they just don't know how to. And what we decided to do was just get people in front of the camera from like, different relationships and just get them talking about it, different cultures, different relationships. And so, we've got a husband and wife, we've got a mom and her like 10-year-old son, we've got like a group of girlfriends, we've got like, and from different cultures too. And the goal of it was just have those conversations, like show people what it is, because I think just the thought of talking about menstruation is like anxiety causing for a lot of people. And I know it was for me, to be honest, like growing up, like it wasn't like I talked about it with my mom a little bit, but like, talking about it candidly, like I was able to do it with my mom, but like I couldn't do it in like a place where like my dad was there or something like that. And, it kind of became like a taboo topic. Whereas now I talk about it very openly, especially after starting Aruna. I'm like, this is my job. Like I'm here to talk about it. So just get used to it. And so I noticed that like having those conversations with my brother around was really helpful for him too, because he got to learn about it. And now he carries like a tampon and a pad in his like little purse. And he's a good guy. He's a good guy. And he keeps them in his bathroom.
The goal.
Like,
That's that's the key takeaway.
And so, yeah, I think it enables people around you to support you better, and support each other better. And so what we've done with this is, as I mentioned, we have like these different combinations. We even have like coworkers come on and like, it's a man and a woman and just kind of like talking about it. And it was really interesting once we got the conversation started, how they went. Firstly, a couple of the learnings that we had was that a lot of people don't actually know much about their own menstrual health. And so much of it we learn from talking to each other. Talking about it with each other also is like very validating, because like, oh, you experienced that too, I experienced that too. And then there was like this one person who I guess was close to her menopause, but it was in her fees that she realized that like the week before her period was when things would go crazy, and she had never realized that until she got to her 40s. And so imagine managing that for like 20 years of your life, like every single month, and feeling like you were crazy like a week before your period. And, there were people that talked about never having used certain products, like, in their culture, they had never talked about using tampons, like it wasn't something that they had used. And so, discovering this product and being like, how do we use it? Like, what do I do? And, even around like menstrual cups as well, feeling the same way about that and not knowing how to use it. There were discussions around that. One of my favorite discussions was actually like the mom and her 10-year-old son. And like, this was the first time, like one of the first times they were talking about periods, and it was in front of a camera. And it was just so like beautifully awkward, because you can feel like the tension and the discomfort initially, and like how like, oh, are we supposed to be talking about this? And, like, what are we doing? This is kind of strange. And like, you can feel like how comfortable they become by the end of it. Like the mom is like whipping out a pad, like putting it onto a pair of underwear, showing her son like how it goes and how it fits. And at the end of it, she was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go home and like talk to my younger son about this now too. And it's like, that's exactly what we need. If we want to try and help people who menstruate, we need to help enable these conversations. And like all we've done with Flow and Tell is show and tell people how to have these conversations in all of these different settings. The other thing that I thought was really interesting was men want to be a part of these conversations. They want to understand. They just don't know how to engage in the conversation in a way that's comfortable, because like, if a random person, like a random man came up to you and was like, oh, tell me about your period, you'd be like, what do you mean? Why are you asking me this question? So providing them like a way to engage in these conversations and also understand from other people, I think is interesting. Once they start understanding how severe it is, and we have like the period pain simulator too. So like
I've been watching that recently. Yeah. Super interesting.
hilarious. They really they get a sense of how severe it actually is, and they're like, what do you mean, like you go through this every month? And like on top of that, having to like wear pads, having to like wear tampons, having to feel like the blood like coming out of you, and like the fatigue that comes with it. I think it's just, there's been a lot of silence around menstruation, and I think it's time to change that, just because there's no need for it. It's not something that should be taboo. It's something that you should be able to talk about, because when you talk about it, you're safely able to access the menstrual health care around it too, because there are so many menstrual health disorders, and you don't learn about them unless you talk about them, because there hasn't been a lot of research done around them. So you can't go to your doctor and talk about it, because they likely won't know about it. And so many times what ends up happening when you go to the doctor is you get prescribed the pill. Or if you go and talk about your PMDD or PMS and you don't know these terms, they're gonna be like, oh, you just have depression, take some depression medication, and it's not going to work for you. So having these conversations with the people around you will enable you to understand what's going on, and will enable you to then have enough information to go and safely access the menstrual health care as well.
Incredible. I was gonna say, Natty, does this echo kind of any of your experience as well in talking to community?
For sure. Yeah, I think you nailed everything. Like, I think that's pretty much all of it. I think one of the things I was going to add was maybe more on the investor side, as well as some of the education that needs to happen, because often I think women's health and femtech gets painted with a broad stroke, and you go into these conversations and they're like, oh, we already have a femtech company in our portfolio, and it's in like a completely different space. Like, I think often they associate it with like the 3 M's of menstruation, maternity, and menopause, and they could have a company that's like in maternity and they're like, oh yeah, we already have a women's health company, even though you're coming in with like a menstruation problem or a menstruation challenge. So I think even just showcasing and talking about the different areas of women's health, like it's not just menstruation, it's not just maternity, there's so much more to be innovated in with perimenopause. I feel like now that's coming up a lot, vaginal dryness, PCOS, endometriosis. There's so much research to be done, and it's not just these 3 M's that people often associate with women's health. There's so much more, and if we can educate people so that they don't just say, oh yeah, we already have that femtech representation, we're good, we checked that box. It's like, no, you can also invest in all these other companies that can work together to overall educate, to overall make better solutions, better products for all of the people who are experiencing these problems.
I love that. And that's been such an interesting reflection, even in this podcast takeover and all the conversations that Melanie and I have been having. I think I've always sort of thought of them almost like as a continuum. Like when we thought about this podcast, it was, we're going to start with menstruation. Then we went to STIs and looking at, health in that space. Then we went to fertility and, maternity support. Then we went to perimenopause and menopause. Like I sort of saw it as this continuum, and I do see the connection and even looking at menstruation almost as like the catalyst for these conversations. Once you start getting comfortable talking about this when you're 10, 11, or even before that, you're 6, 7, you're, ready for that moment when you do actually start menstruating, you feel empowered, you have that language, that then makes you feel more confident talking about potential fertility challenges you might be having, or some of the cues that are going to impact you, 5, 10, 15 years down the line. And I think of my own personal reflections in my stories. I had so many issues as an early menstruator that then impacted my fertility a lot. And I never saw them as kind of connected sort of chapters that would impact each other, but they are so concrete and the needs are so significant in each of those chapters. They all need to be supported and lifted. But what would that look like if we actually felt this continuum of support all the way through our lives as women and as menstruators and folks that have so many different hormonal changes and all of these different elements of our physical health that are nuanced as women? What would that look like for it to be researched, talked about, empowered, to have community around those different spaces, and for, all of us to be able to show up and actually talk about all of these different challenges as they continue to evolve, right? Like, how do we build that sense of comfort throughout all of it? This has been such an eye-opening kind of continuum of catalyzing conversations. Those are my triple C's.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really fun. We've been kind of doing some thought experiments on what the world could look like in each episode. And I'm thinking like this world where we have this like equitable research and development and comfort in talking about menstruation and the impact it would have on you two as founders and on your businesses in that world. Like I'm seeing that like every person has a tampon and a pad that's not going to negatively impact the sustainability, like our future of the planet. We have those in our back pocket, in our bag, just to help with, or to give out and to talk about. That
And our
you'd be
little brothers
walking,
too.
yeah, exactly, yeah, and you'd be walking into those rooms, and people are welcoming a multitude of femtech products in their portfolio. And where, like, when my daughter's at a certain age, she's super excited to menstruate, and I have a friend whose daughter is super excited to menstruate, and they've had like a package set aside since she was like 8 or something like that like has her name on it, to be like, for your first menstruation. She's like, can I have it? And her mom's like, you're not there yet, but I want that for my daughter, where it's exciting, so like, what in that, like, that parallel universe, hopefully crystal ball of the future, is there anything else we haven't touched on that you would envision in that world for the founders in that space, as well as the menstruators in that?
I think it'd also be good to just get people off of autopilot, is kind of what we like to say, because people are so careful about the food they put in their body. And you talk to someone like, oh, I'm only doing non-GMO, gluten-free, dairy, all these things that they're thinking about. And then you ask them about their skincare, and they're like, oh yeah, I only use like the clean beauty at Sephora, and I use chemical-free, toxin-free. And then you're like, oh, and then what tampons do you use? And they're just like, oh, that blue box on the shelf that's always like, I just pick it up every time. And it's like, people are so careful, and
Yeah.
we're living in a world where people are so into these more like clean ingredients and sustainability and toxin free, and yet they're on autopilot when it comes to their cycle. And I think because it has been so taboo and so stigmatized, we just want to quickly go get whatever's off the shelf, whatever's cheapest, and just check out as fast as possible, hope no one catches us as we're running to the self checkout. And I think if we could get people to get off autopilot and actually think about, what am I putting into my body? What do all of those stages look like in my cycle? How do I feel during my luteal phase, during, when I'm ovulating, when I'm on my period? What are the symptoms I'm experiencing? Am I bloated? Do I have cramps? And there's been a whole movement around cycle syncing and really starting to understand each of these stages, and maybe changing your nutrition or your movement and your exercise routine according to the way you're feeling. And so we've been trying to do a lot of education about that, and do like cycle syncing workshops with people so that they can understand their body and understand how they should maybe be changing throughout these different times. And this month we're actually releasing a little workbook that people can do to have like a little tracker and fill it out. And so I think that's one thing I would want to change as well, is just getting people to come off of autopilot. And the way Pinterest reported it is as mindful menstruation, and they said it's one of the rising trends to watch this year. So just getting people to be more mindful about how they think about their cycle when they're already so mindful about all of these other areas of wellness.
I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs in particular work in that space of like, I'm going to be most productive here, or I'm going to have my best thinking, creative time here. I need to rest here. Like, leave it to entrepreneurs to kind of hack and sort of see these different cycles and see the unique opportunities and sort of pull more out of that. But that's encouraging to see that this is going to be a trend to watch. Mindful menstruation. I'm here for it.
Rashmi, is there anything you would add to that parallel crystal ball universe?
No, I love this. I love dreaming about the future and all the incredible ways that we can do all of this and manage our own menstrual health. I think, if I were to add to that, I think in addition to mindful menstruation, it would be informed menstruation. I think we need a lot more in terms of personalized care when it comes to menstruation, and understanding that everyone's ranges don't fit in within like this like specific range. When you go to get your like blood test done, people's ranges vary depending on their own personal metabolism and their own body. And so I think I'd love to see more products come out that are tracking your menstrual health and the various different aspects of it. I think that would be super cool, because I feel like that would be a much more efficient way to help you manage your menstrual health, in addition to understanding the cycles. I think understanding the cycles actually makes such a big difference, because like I know when I'm going to be cranky, I know when I'm going to be, the most optimized, and like we'll be able to work really quickly. And so also knowing what to feed your own body, knowing how to do all of the different things around it in a way that is informed from sensors and from blood tests, I think would be incredible too.
Hmm.
And then also recognizing the intersection of all of this as well. I think intersection is such a big thing, and we can't look at femtech by itself. We have to realize that femtech is an intersection of all of these other things, and we can't really look at it separately, because I think that's one thing that's happening to us is when we go and talk to investors, it's like, are you a femtech company? Are you a clean tech company? Are you a this company? Are you
Mm-hmm.
that company? And it's like recognizing that solutions that actually work are an intersection of everything, and are an intersection of so many different things, and it needs to happen that way, because otherwise if you do it in isolation, you're going to cause a problem in something else, and we don't want to heal our bodies and harm the planet. We don't want to harm the, like, do something for the planet and harm our own bodies. We don't want to, cause economic challenges by creating something that is unaffordable to a lot of people. So I think that there's a lot of different pillars we need to consider. And I mean, when you look at the pillars underneath sustainability, it's environmental, economic, and societal. So if you consider all of those and you create technology that's an intersection of all three of those, in addition to the problem that you're solving, whether it's like femtech or whatever, I think that is the ultimate future that I want to live in.
So good. That's so good. I love all those answers. What an amazing wrap up to this podcast series, Melanie. I mean, I feel like we're ending on such a, this intersection note and the power of pulling in all of these types of conversations and comfort with discomfort. Yeah, it's such a powerful movement that I think we need to explore from all of these different lenses and not also think about it from an exclusive sort of gendered lens. Like there's so many different impacts that are involved. There's so many different stakeholders and folks that can benefit and be involved in all the different stages. Like it makes it so much more powerful, I think, to look at it from that wider lens, Rashmi. So I really appreciate that kind of stretch of all of us thinking about it that way. Even though if we just thought about menstruation and this one isolated product, it still would be super impactful. Whoa, it's like a, massive doubling, quadrupling, kind of 10xing in a totally different way. So I really appreciate kind of ending on that note. And that's something each one of us can take away, right? Every single listener can sort of think about it within that wider context. So powerful ending. Really like that.
Thank you so much. Amazing. Go ahead, Kayla.
Just one final question, because I know you're both incredibly well connected. I know definitely with Nadia, I think she's probably engaged with every single support organization that exists in Canada. Can you walk us through any key support organizations? We talked about the ecosystem support and kind of adding some more of that at the scale up type of phase, but for founders who might be at the infancy of their entrepreneurship journey, any key supports, resources, organizations they should check out, and any call outs and anything else that might be missing to end the episode.
Definitely Startup Canada. We're here. We got to shout out Startup Canada. They were so critical in our early days. And I remember the pitch competition was like one of my very first pitch competitions that I ever did. And I feel like it creates such a trusting, safe environment to pitch your business for the first time. So definitely want to shout that out. I would say League of Innovators as well has been so critical, not only the programming, but also the community, because it's all founders under 30. And so I've made so many just like lifelong friends even from it that, we played volleyball together in the summer in a league, and like we go to each other's birthdays. And I think like entrepreneurship can be such a lonely journey. So if you do have those trusted friends and not just colleagues or other founders that you can connect with, that helps so much as well. I would say Sheboot as well. They definitely helped us in learning how to fundraise. That was like the one program that literally broke down every single thing about building your data room, due diligence, how to handle tough investor questions. And then ones outside of Canada as well that I want to give a shout out to would be Dream Ventures in New York. They have been super helpful. They've actually been invested in our company as well. And then Next 36 in Canada too. So many, I could list so many that have been so critical, but those are just like a few that I'd love to give a shout out to.
Awesome, Nadia. Rashmi, any additions on the list?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many, huh? I think for us, the ones that have been really critical are definitely Mars. The Women in Clean Tech program has been incredible for us. MySpace, incredible community there as well. So supportive. We moved out from Vancouver to Nova Scotia to Halifax. And so the DAL community has been amazing too. So DAL Innovates, they've got the L2M program, the Amira Idea Hub program, even Invest Nova Scotia, and all of the programs that they have are incredible. But I like Nadia's suggestion of thinking outside of Canada as well and looking into accelerators that are in other universities too. So one that we participated was actually Rev Ithaca, that's based out of Cornell. And so that has been incredible for us. CDL is actually, it started in Toronto, but I guess it's a global one now. So I would highly recommend that one as well. And I think that one is actually connected to Next Founders or Next 36 somehow. But yeah, there are an insane amount of them that will support you. But I think beyond just the knowledge they give you, the community that you get from them is by far the biggest thing you can get from any of these programs. So really participating in them, getting to know the people that you participate with, and developing like friendships. They are honestly lifelong friendships. Like I've called so many of them like from, my Mars cohort, and I'm like, guys, I don't know what I'm doing here. What should I do? How do I answer this question? And we kind of do that with each other, and it becomes like a peer network of support. So
Amazing. Thank you both so much. All these communities of communities. It's a powerful thing to have those networks, and especially in times like now, things are a little wacky and all over the place. And to the extent we have trusted people that we can pick up the phone and say, "I'm overwhelmed. I don't know where to look." Can you also just listen to my bad day? All of those different things, on top of having communities of other groups and products that you're using, and all these other great things you're using to your actual companies. It's so inspiring. So congrats to both of you on all of the success, all of the movement, all of the celebration. I feel like you're just such great champions within the Canadian entrepreneurship ecosystem. And I'm so excited to see you both scale and become the unicorns of tomorrow that become this, new wave of unbelievable FemTech founders that we see continue to evolve. So huge kudos for everything you've done to date. And we cannot wait to see where you both go next.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.